Good morning, everyone. Kia ora koutou. Thanks for coming to this little talk this morning. I'm very excited to be here. It's my first time talking at NZGDC. I came 3 years ago as a brand new indie game developer, and I'm very excited to be talking about making games with weird game engines. So a little bit about myself. My name is Jevon. I have a PhD in computer science, and I was previously, before becoming a game developer, a web developer and an architect and a team lead. And then I decided to jump into my dream job, which was making video games. So I started working on my first commercial game at the start of 2021 and went full-time at the end of 2021. And that game is Adaptory. It is a 2D indie base building simulation game. We signed with indie.io as a publisher in marketing support in 2024. And the game is coming to Steam Early Access at the end of the year, which is very, very exciting. This is what the game looks like as it is right now. So it is quite a complex game. You have different simulations. There's gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide. Oxygen rises, carbon dioxide falls. There's liquid. Liquid turns into ice when it's too cold. It turns into solid when it's to gas when it's too hot. There's day-night cycles, light simulations. Trees require light. There's power. There's liquid pumps. Characters that need sleep. They have conversations with each other, there's diary entries, and you can see the UI is also quite complex as well. And so I'm using Java. So I'm using an engine called libgdx, which is an open source cross-platform Java library that provides a lot of the audio input, physics, graphics, and that sort of stuff. It's used also by Slay the Spire in Mindustry and Wildermyth, and also by the animation software Spine 2D. And as you can see here, this is sort of how I describe how Adaptory fits into the whole ecosystem. We have OpenGL and all the Windows managers, and then we've got LWJGL, which is also what Minecraft uses, and then we've got libgdx on top of that. So I'm definitely standing on the shoulders of giants. So for this talk, I'm going to be saying, what is a weird game engine? And my definition is something that gets people to say, huh. So when people come to see my game in conventions, they say, is your game in Unity? And I'm saying, no, it's in Java. And they go, huh. So for this talk, I'm going to define weird game engines as anything that isn't Unity or Unreal. And I'm making a base building game, and it's interesting to see what engines other base building games are made in. And the majority of them are not made in Unity or Unreal. Factorio, which I am binging hard right now, is made in C++. Satisfactory is in Unreal. Oxygen Not Included is in Unity. Dwarf Fortress is in C++. The biggest games are made with weirder engines. So the goals of the talk that I'm trying to give to you this morning is why weird engines are sometimes the right answer for your game, why sometimes they're not the right answer for your game. To cover how to succeed when you're using an unusual game engine, risks to be aware of and to mitigate. So I'm going to be taking you through a lot of the journey, a lot of the lessons that I've learned over the last couple of years. If you're a publisher or an investor, why you should publish or invest in games that aren't Unity or Unreal. And then the million-dollar question, would I use libgdx again for the next Adaptory? So this is there's a lot of ground to cover. And there's no yes or no answer for should you use engine X or should you use engine Y. I've found 10 areas that I'll take you through, and I'll take you through some perspectives and experiences that I had making Adaptory. With a few caveats, I'm very aware that Adaptory is my first commercial game. I've been making games since I was 12, but this is my first commercial venture, the first one that's on Steam, which is very exciting. I'm a solo developer. I have another developer who's helping out with some open source development, but I'm the only developer working on the game, and I'm the only full-time person working on the game as well. And I've not shipped anything with Unity or Unreal. I've made a lot of prototypes, I've made a lot of experiments using Unreal in particular, but I'm aware that I'm not fully aware of what you do get with Unity or Unreal. But I think there's a lot of lessons that you can take away from this, from using Java in this case. So the first thing, if you're considering to jump into a new project with a weird engine, or you're considering about switching to a new engine, or you're considering to invest in a company that's using a weird engine, is your players. This is why we make and create and release video games. This should be at the front of your mind for every decision. If you're making a game and no one is going to play it, why are you making the game? Is this the studio's first game of many, or is this the game that your studio is only going to make? It's fine if you're doing a project that is just for yourself, if you're just going into this Python-based game engine for experiments or for laughs. Just be aware. It would be quite disheartening if you jump into a project thinking, I'm going to sell 1 million copies, but I'm not considering the players. And this must come into the questions that you take into the engine choice as well. In my experience over the last couple of years, players do not care what engine the game is in. They care about having a fun time. They care about having replayability or creativity or being immersed. They want to sit down and press play and have fun and have no issues. They don't care if it's Java. They don't care if it's Unity. That said, different genres have different expectations. If your players are mostly on console, if they expect to be able to play the game on console, then it makes sense that you can release on console on day one, which means that you should have an engine that can go into console on day one. It's very important to ask your players to do your market research. That is a completely different talk and a very, very important one, but you need to ask them, what do they care about? So in particular for Adaptory, I did some market research over 4 years, where I asked, what is the most important things you think there are in a base building game? And they said replayability, complexity, technology, and then mod support. So I knew modding was very, very important. And from my experience playing base building games, I found that games based in Unity or Unreal were quite difficult to mod. If they hadn't been designed to be modded from day one, it was almost impossible to mod them. You had to do weird DLL patching, or it just wasn't possible. Whereas I knew, like with Java, with Minecraft, Java Edition, people could mod the game almost instantly because you can sort of insert yourself into there. And so I knew that Java was a pretty decent base to possibly do modding. And again, with players, I'm a big believer in using the right tools for the right job. If you're starting out, try and use as many different game engines as you can, learn as many different ways of working, learn about how Unreal does things, learn about how Unity does things. Game jams are a great way to test out different engines. So with Adaptory, I really enjoyed working in Unreal. It was my game engine of choice for a very long time. I made heaps of prototypes of different types of games. But when I was coming up with Adaptory, with the idea of Adaptory, I was really enjoying having this 2D simulation. And Unreal didn't feel right. I felt like I would have to be fighting Unreal all the way to make this 2D game, simulation-heavy, test-heavy game that I needed to make. I tried Unity a couple of times, but it never really felt right. It was a bit confusing for me at the time. When I started, I'd never heard of Godot. I was a web developer. I tried some other Java-based engines. I tried something called JMonkey Engine 3, which was fine, but it was very bare bones. And I thought that the underlying technology of libgdx, which was LWJGL, it was too low level. I'd have to deal with uploading shaders and vertices and models, whereas with libgdx, I could just use this networking library. I could just use this input library. And so libgdx felt it was at the right level of depth and lightness as well. Second thing that is a very big drawcard for using an unusual engine or an open source engine is it might be free. You might be able to use it for no cost. But before you jump into that, be aware of what were those fees paying for? Was it just rent seeking, or was it actually going towards development of the engine? Was it going towards the ecosystem? And how do you fill those gaps? And the question that you need to take into the game is, how are you going to hire or outsource to fill those gaps? For example, if you're using an open source engine, how hard is it to make changes to the engine? If you make a change, how hard is it for you to send the patches upstream? Are you going to have to maintain your own fork of the engine at all times? If you're using a smaller engine, what happens if, say, Apple decides to drop your rendering stack, as they have done with OpenGL? Luckily, in my case, one of the libgdx developers or LWJGL developers have done a porting rewriting process that converts OpenGL into Metal, which is really, really cool. Is the engine actively developed, or is this an old engine? Because the engine is going to have to evolve over time. if you're looking at weird engines, consider how often it is updated. Is the engine's development sustainable? Is there an active community working on the engine? Or is this an engine that is looked after by one or two developers from one or two companies, and they could decide to pull the plug at any time? And what other games are using the engine that you're looking at? Are they contributing back to the engine? Is there a positive community that's involved? So I noticed that in NZGDC, there are a lot of games working on the using library that were contributing patches to the library back, which gave me hope and gave me confidence that the engine was stable. Another thing that your fees may have been paying for is maintenance. How often does your engine update their dependencies? What happens if there's a security vulnerability? Is maintenance just limited to one or two people, or is it an entire community effort? And again, what happens if your small engine, the maintainers burn out or they get hit by a bus? These are unlikely risks, but you need to be aware of them. And with documentation and support, how well documented is the source code if you have access to the source code? Hopefully you have access to the source code. How good is it? Do you understand it? Who keeps the source code up to date? So I found, like, for example, with NZGDC, there was a wiki, there was a community online, the documentation was actively updated. With JMonkey Engine, all the tutorials were out of date. If you're using something that has no fees or is open source, if something is confusing, you're on your own. So it is also important to think about, is there an active Discord? Is there an active GitHub page? How does the community collaborate with each other? So one of the things that big game engines have is they have scale, momentum, and they have service providers. How will you be contributing to the long-term success of your engine? Are you going to be putting in money or development time? What happens if your engine is completely abandoned? In that case, do you feel confident that your studio can maintain it long-term, or if the engine is abandoned, is that the end of your project? So with Adaptree, I'm very comfortable with the Java ecosystem, which is why I was looking into Java engines in the first place. I've already contributed patches and bug reports upstream. They've been accepted. And the plan is with Adaptree, depending on how early access sales go, I'll be hiring a part or full-time developer just to focus on the engine. Third area I want to cover is control. So if you're using a big engine, I think it can feel that you're often at the whims of the company that made the engine. If you're using something that is open source or smaller, it's very unlikely you'll be coerced into a more expensive plan or rent increase, or saying you now have to pay based on installs rather than all that malarkey. And if it's open source, then in theory you can always fork the engine and forge your own path. But I will say as a caveat, do you know how expensive it is to develop a game engine? It is very expensive. So as part of this, you should consider, with your game, how long do you want to develop it? How long do you want to support it? Is this a game that you want to release in 3 months' time from start to finish, or is this something that you want to work on for 5, 10 years? In my case with Adaptree, I knew that base building games were complex, there were a lot of simulations, and I wanted a game that I can continually update and make updates to. And so it made sense with Adaptree that we had a platform that was under our control, something that I could maintain and something that I could understand. But again, like if you're making just a console game that's going straight out and you have a single release, it makes less sense to use a custom engine. Then looking into pre-production. So you've chosen your engine, or you're considering choosing an engine, and you're starting to you've got a game idea and you're going into, how do I actually make this game? One thing about the biggest game engines that I did not realize going into game development is that the biggest game engines have huge asset stores, lots of assets available for free, available for cheap. You can get going with finding the fun really, really quickly. There's audio, there's templates, example projects, mechanics, tools and libraries. With a bigger game engine, with that scale and momentum, it's cheaper for you to find people who can help out. You have outsourcing studios that can help out as well. So finding the fun and iteration with a game that is in a smaller engine will be slower and more expensive, so you need to be aware of this. And again, going back to your players, is your game, is your genre, is it more about being immersed in a beautiful 3D world? Is it more about gameplay and mechanics that can help influence your decision as well? But I will say that no matter your engine, you need to be able to integrate third-party libraries. Please do not write your own physics engine, your own animation, or your own audio engine. And so with Adaptree, with libgdx, they did have integrations with different libraries, which was fantastic. So with Adaptree, we're using Spine for animations, and we're using Fmod for sound. And this is great because then there's an entire new section you don't have to worry about. You don't have to find out all the different ways that the audio can fail. And you can have people coming in, you can have assets that you can take from, that you can reuse to get going. Because I'm a big believer that good games come from iteration, lots and constant iteration. Something else that you would find, or that I have found, is that Unity, Unreal, they have lots of conventions and expectations on how games should work, or things that are easier to get started with. And this is why a Unity game feels like a Unity game. Like often you can pick up a game and you can be like, this was made in Unreal, wasn't it? And they say, yes. You won't get these for free. And so you need to spend more time with your players to see if these tropes, if these expectations are what they expect. Do they expect, if you're making a 3D game, for motion blurring to always be on? If you're making a Unity game, do they expect if you're making a game that is often in Unity, do they expect the UI to feel a certain way, to have certain mouse click behaviors and that sort of thing? And so I've spent a lot of time taking Adaptree to things like PAX Australia with its Border Code, Armageddon, and Adaptree's on the show floor here at Kiwi Game Zone, trying to understand, does this make sense? What is missing? Do I need to spend time working on adding mechanics that I would have got for free in Unity? So in the middle of last year, we were successful in signing with a publisher called Indie.io, and they are there to help out with marketing support as well. And in my process in looking for a publisher, I found that publishers, they focus entirely on minimizing risk. They want to know that your game can be ported. It might not be ported. It might always stay on PC, but they want to know that it can be ported. As soon as you talk with a publisher and they know that you have a path to be able to go to Switch, for example, they feel a lot better. They feel a lot more comfortable. Publishers, if you're looking to work with a publisher, they may also have their own QA process, their own process for localization, their own release process. If you're using an unusual engine, you're going to have to either spend more time working with the publisher to integrate your process with their process, or they're going to have to spend more time integrating their process with your process, which is fine. You just need to be aware of it and to prepare for it in your production plan. Something that can help with this is talking about with publishers, what are some of the successful games that have used your engine? So I often say, I'm using libgdx, it's the same as Slay the Spire. And people are like, oh, Slay the Spire has been ported very well, it's been very successful, libgdx is okay. You can talk about how games in the past have been ported. If you're making a game in an engine that has never been ported, that's a much harder sell to go with a publisher, in which case you should strongly consider staying self-published. When you look at games that have been ported before, have an investigation to see, like, did the studio port the game themselves, or did they use a third party? Do players expect the game to be ported? Again, going back to players. So I've looked at base building games. I found that very few of them expect to play it on console. And so with Adaptree, libgdx I chose because it is specifically cross-platform. It's designed for PC, Mac, Linux, iOS, Android, and HTML. So it's like, that's a good base for porting. And I knew that Slay the Spire had been ported. So again, going back to the players with the market research that I did, I asked, what platforms do you prefer to play games on? And I was really surprised with this. 100% of the audience preferred to play on PC. So we do not need to worry about porting. I have this data to back me up. So when I was going to publishers, I could tell them, like, we do have a path to porting, but it is not necessary. Along with publishers, there will be different funding sources you might need to work with, or you might like to work with. Government grants, research and development grants, working with investors. Make sure that you can articulate clearly why you chose this specific engine for your specific game. Say why it was the right choice and why it was the right engine. again, focusing on the player. Make sure it is easier to show that you have a game or a genre or an idea that has validated demand. Players want to play this game on PC. This is usually more powerful than any uncertainty or risk with the technical side of things. So we've gone through pre-production and we've found a publisher. We're deep in production now. Keep in mind, as you are making this game, players want and they will buy a game, not an engine. If you're working in a web engine, it is going to be much easier to get caught into focusing on developing the engine as opposed to making the game. This is a separate talk that I'd love to give one day, but some things that I've thought about to try and keep me focusing on making a game as opposed to making the engine or improving the engine. If you're trying to make a game where everything is moddable from day one, it's likely not going to be fun. You're going to be spending all your time in integration. It is much easier to take a game that is 90%, 80% modded, and then add the last 10 or 20% after you found the fun, as opposed to making everything moddable and then trying to insert the fun afterwards. When you're working with anything that interacts with the engine, ask yourself, how is this work that I'm going to do? How is it going to increase wish lists of my game? How is this going to improve the playability of my game as opposed to the engine? Or is this just a technical thing that's been bothering you for a while, or something that is just slowing it down? Something else that has helped me through development with libgdx is, have you received any player feedback in the last week? Are people playing your game? Are you getting people to see how the game is evolving? If you haven't got any player feedback for weeks or for months, then it's likely you have spent way too much time in the engine itself, and players are not seeing what you're actually doing. As a guide, I feel like a budget spent on improving your engine should be around 5% or less. Any more than that is probably a sign that you should probably be an engine developer as opposed to a game developer. And this hurts as a previous software engineer, but your code should have some jank. It should be a little bit hacky. It should be slightly uncomfortable. If it was perfect, you wouldn't be making a game, you'd be making an engine. If it was a disaster, you would not have something that was shippable or maintainable. So I describe it as slightly uncomfortable, and Adaptory definitely has slightly uncomfortable. This is a big one, testing and compatibility. Players expect your game to just run. They don't want to debug your code. They don't want to have to decipher weird esoteric stack traces. And along with that, most players, if they encounter a bug or a crash, they're not going to report it. How are you going to find out about the crashes? What will be your messaging when you discover a bug? What is your testing and your QA and your release process? Do you have a rollback process? Do you have CI/CD? Engines like Unity and Unreal can support some of these. Your engine that you may have chosen may not have. But I found these are so important, especially CI/CD. Continuous integration and continuous delivery. So being able to continually test the game, the library, the engine, and making sure that you have a release that you can deploy at any time. You also need to think about what devices do you need to have access to. So for example, with Adaptory, I've found that I've been doing free alpha releases every 2 to 4 months. This has meant free testing. I have a demo, people can play, I get feedback, I get testing, I get access to a huge range of devices, but I'm still saving a lot of the development for the content of the final release. With Adaptory, I have a community testers group who are amazing on Discord. They've all come on board. They like the game, they want to support it, and they get access to the unreleased version of the game. They get access to the development team, and they get to influence the direction of the game. And from that, I also have a database of all the PC specs of all my testers. So if I have an issue with, say, someone in Germany with a controller that is Xbox on 3 monitors, I can look through my database and be like, oh, one of my community testers has something very similar. Can I get them to test this specific thing? So with Adaptory, I have access to Windows 10, 11, and 2 versions of Macs. And specifically for reporting crashes and bugs, I added rollbar from day one. So if there's a crash or a bug, it gets sent if the player has enabled it, and also use Mixpanel to track statistics of how players are progressing through the game. So are players getting stuck on a certain level, but like stage of the game? Are they progressing through the gameplay nicely? This can all help with understanding, are you finding the fun? Are you engaging with your players? Because the truth is that bigger game engines have been more widely tested. Games in Unity and Unreal have been across, I would imagine, hundreds of millions of devices, whereas if you're using a smaller engine, it might be in the millions. You have to think about operating systems as an issue, locales, different hardware, different monitors, different DPI settings, different input devices, different controllers, different codecs, different character encodings. And the more lightweight that your engine is, the more of these you'll probably have to deal with. So if you're going into a smaller engine, consider how good are your full stack debugging tools, skills. So again, I strongly recommend doing CI and CD because you get that testing loop. I recommend doing lightweight test-driven development, which is a separate talk, and also doing the error reporting. So with Adaptera, I knew that I was very well experienced with the Java ecosystem, very well experienced with Java test-driven development, and I knew that with my game in particular, it's a very simulation-heavy game. So I knew that I wanted to have a full stack of testing of how the different simulations work. Looking at games like Factorio, this is also what they do to make sure that their game engine works, their game rules work well. I knew that I was very comfortable reading source code. I was very methodical in the way that I debug problems. And I love full stack debugging. I love going from the top level all the way down to the machine code. I love being in that space. If you're not as comfortable with that, it might make more sense to focus on a bigger, more well-documented engine that has more of these tropes that save you from the mechanics. So as a bit of fun, here was an example from Adaptera. I had very unusual error reports coming from random places saying that they couldn't play the game. And I got a screenshot, and this is what it looked like. That is not what it's supposed to look like. No idea. So I realized this was only the UI. If they got into the game continued to work, so it was something to do with the UI. A bit more debugging. It would only occur if you were in Turkey. And the culprit was that I was not using string.toLowercase with a locale in a library. This was a fun thing to try and work out. It took, I think, 3 months. And it was in a third-party library as well, so I had to submit a patch upstream. But this is the sort of weird and wonderful debugging and full-stack testing you'll have to do if you're using a smaller engine. And with the support of Logan, who's on the floor as well, he managed to fix the bug. We pushed upstream, and everything is fine in Turkey now. And the reason that it was actually failing is because in Turkish locales, if you do string.toLower, the I turns into an I without a dot, which messed up display in the strings that I was loading. And then I get to yell at Max for a little bit. I made the decision very early on to make sure that Adaptera was playable on a Mac, and that's because I like to go on holiday sometimes, and when I go on holiday, I like to play games. I played a lot of RimWorld, played a lot of Stardew Valley, and I wanted to be able to play my games. But being able to play Adaptera on a Mac has been endless and expensive. Dealing with notarization, dealing with stapling the notarization to the apps, dealing with the different tooling and the changes, spending $150 a year on being able to build and notarize. You need to have a Mac if you're going to make Mac games. You need to worry about certificates. They'll deprecate the process at any moment for no reason. And even once you've got everything sorted, they'll be like, okay, now we need to make sure that this jar and this zip and this jar is also notarized as well, with very little notification. And this is before you have to worry about what is it like running my game on Arch 64 or dealing with a Mac or a Linux-based environment. Has this work been worth it? Unfortunately, I think it has been just. But I haven't done any console certification, and I suspect the process is a lot worse. But at least I do not have to do the Apple Store because I've done that in the past with WebDev, and I do not want to do that again. So you're going through production, you're now ramping up to release, which is where Adaptera is right now. if you're looking at using an unusual in-game engine, what happens if you suddenly need to ramp up? What happens if you make a release and suddenly you have 1 million players and they have bug reports coming in from everywhere? What happens if you get a fantastic funding deal and you need to suddenly increase your team? You need to be aware that your available hiring and outsourcing pool is going to be a lot smaller. It is going to be harder and more expensive to find the right people to work in your engine. So you need to be able to factor in upskilling and training anyone that comes on board. And so that is what I've done with Adaptory as well. And don't forget the communication overheads as well. If you're using a bigger game engine, there are tropes. If you're using an unusual engine, you're going to have to work out what does the production pipeline look like. And as you go towards release, again with the asset stores, free or cheap polish or VFX may not be available. So you need to factor that in as well. So with Adaptory, I've got a database of people or contacts I call accelerators, so that if I suddenly need to get a dozen community managers, I've got some people lined up. If I need to get some developers lined up, I've got them ready to go. And then porting. So a lot of conversations I've had with using an unusual engine is that you don't want to use it because you could never port the game to console. But often it's something that you only do, or your publisher does, after you've released the game, if the game is successful, for example. Going back to players again, what do your players actually play? Do they play on console? Does your genre work on other devices? Does it make sense? Are you doing updates, or is it just a single release? Are you doing early access? Are you doing 1.0? So I found that with base building games, very few base building games were on console. RimWorld is probably the biggest one that I know of, and they had to rewrite their entire user interface in order to go on console. And as a result, they are still, I think, 3 DLCs behind, and I don't think they're updating the DLCs at all. So I realized base building games don't tend to be on console, and it's because of the user interface. It's not because of the engine, it's because of the player experience. But it is helpful to know that you can go towards console. So a question you need to ask is, has your engine ever been ported before? Who did it? And get in touch with them. So I found that Sighead Games, a company I believe in the States, they ported Slay the Spire, and I got in touch. I was like, hey, I'm thinking about making a game in libgdx. How would you port it? And they gave me some fantastic tips on how to get the game in libgdx ready to port. Things like being able to support Steam Big Picture mode, being able to support controllers from day one, and having the rendering loop completely separate from the simulation loop and that sort of thing. And that helped me a lot in the early process of designing the architecture of Adaptory. And be aware that if your engine is small, porting is probably going to be a lot more expensive. I don't know how expensive because I haven't gone through this process yet, but I'm estimating about 1 to 10 times the cost of actually developing the game. And so we go back to the base building games that I talked about at the start. Have they actually been ported? And the surprising thing is that most games that are on Unity or Unreal have not been ported. And most of the games that are not in Unity or Unreal have been ported, which I found really, really interesting. Yeah, so again, do your market research, understand how does your genre work. And then finally, creative direction. Do not discount your creativity and your team's creativity. Games are also art. They're expressions of story. And with a more unusual engine, you are freer to create a unique player experience. The weirdness of your engine might be part of your selling point. It's totally okay to say, that engine didn't feel right, this engine felt right. If you have a good time making the game, it's more likely you'll have more fun, you'll have stronger intrinsic motivation, and less risk of burnout, because from my experience in the last couple of years, making a game is a long period and you want to be engaged the entire time. And if you're spending all of that time fighting an engine, it's less likely that you'll finish. So it's okay to choose an engine that you enjoy. So why did I choose libgdx? I wanted a game that was moddable. I wanted a game that was scalable. I wanted a game where I could have lots of complex simulations working together. I wanted a game that was very interconnected. I expected that the hard part of the game would be the user interface design and the testing and integration of all the simulations. When I was looking into the genre, looking into engines, automated testing in Unreal and Unity seemed rare. I played with libgdx. I was having fun. No other engine felt quite right. I really liked open source. I liked having control over the engine and the destiny of the game. And I liked the long-term stability of controlling your platform. And I was also very experienced with Java. I knew a bit of C++ and C. I didn't have any C#. So I decided to use the languages and the engines and the tooling that I knew rather than spending 2 years to understand how to do a different engine. So the million-dollar question, would I do the same thing back in February 2021 if I was starting a new adaptory with all the knowledge that I have now? Something I've found is that no one has said anything bad about Java, which was surprising because coming from a web development background, from a software engineering background, software engineers love to rag on Java. The players, they do not care. Any slowness from the game is from my bad coding. It is not from the language or the environments. I was luckily at Gamescom a few weeks ago, and I got 2 people saying, "This game is so smooth. How did you make this game so fluid and so flexible?" Which was fantastic to hear. The OpenGL, the hotspot just-in-time compiler for Java is almost as fast as native C. So if I looked at different benchmarks, and I found that C# was below Java. So I think I've chosen the right engine for making complex simulations. Java's automated testing frameworks are fantastic. I've been working in them for decades, and I knew that a good automation testing framework was going to help a lot with Adaptory. Java is fantastic at concurrency. I wanted a game where I could have concurrent systems and simulations working together. When I started working on Adaptory, I wasn't aware of Unity's dots system. I think it was still like in beta testing or something, but I knew that I could do it with Java. Yes, Java is a lot of typing, which I am frustrated about. I have to do a lot of factories and services and all that other stuff. And there are some C# features I wish it had. I wish I had stronger enums. I wish I had structs. But I do have a pathway to console, which is to go PC, Mac, and then Linux, and then Steam Deck, and then Switch. And the process of going from Linux to Steam Deck will give me time to rewrite the UI. Steam Deck to Switch will help me go from Linux to a console device. And then from that, PlayStation, Xbox, whatever new platforms there are out there. And I'm very confident that where we are right now, we're going to have a successful launch into early access, which is very, very exciting. I still believe in using the right tools for the right job. From what I've learned over the last few years, I wish I'd tried more engines and prototypes out first. I wish I spent more time investigating Unity. I wish I knew about Godot. Godot looks really, really cool. I still don't know if automated testing in Unity and Unreal is a thing. When I looked yesterday, I looked for Unity automated testing, Unreal automated testing, and the top results were, is there any automated testing for Unreal or Unity? So it doesn't feel like it's a thing, whereas Java automated testing, you have the entire GitHub CI suite, everything, like you have JUnit and all the different testing frameworks. In reflection, I'd want to have done platform and device market research earlier. It was risky not doing it until when I started in 2022, so I'd sort of committed to making a libgdx game before I actually understood just how powerful the PC was in terms of the genre. So I'd want to do that a lot earlier. And I should have also focused on getting more third-party libraries in earlier. I spent a couple of months making my own audio engine using LWJGL had a connection to OpenAL, which is an audio layer. And I didn't realize Fmod integration was a thing until after I had done the audio layer. And integrating Fmod as a sound engine has been fantastic. So if you're going to use an unusual engine, please do not write anything more than you need to. So yes, I would absolutely do Adaptory again with that game, if it was that same game with something like libgdx or with libgdx. If it wasn't Adaptory, if it wasn't a base building game, I would choose the right tools. It might be something different. So in summary, if you're deciding to go with a different game engine or a smaller game engine or something that isn't Unity or Unreal, focus on the player first. This is so important. Be aware that if your game engine is free, there are going to be hidden costs, and be aware of what those costs could be. Think about how long-term is your horizon. Is this a game that you're just going to release in a couple of months, or is this a game that you want to have updates for 10 years? You need to be able to use third-party libraries. Do not choose an engine where you have to write everything from scratch or everything is all included. You need to be able to include different libraries. Be aware that if you're looking to go with a publisher, if you're using a smaller engine, it comes with more risk. You need to be able to articulate that risk and to be able to argue why your engine choice is better. Be aware that players want a game, they do not want an engine. If you're working in your engine, if you're working in your game, they do not care about how different loading is 5% faster, they care about the game being fun. Be aware that bigger engines are more widely tested. How are you going to approach testing and compatibility? How are you going to make sure that if the game crashes, that you get aware of it, and have you factored that into your production schedule? Be prepared to train and upskill a team if your game does well, or if you're looking to expand, or if you're going towards release. If you're choosing an unusual engine, be aware, can your game be ported? It might not be ported, but it helps a lot to know that it can be ported. Most importantly, don't discount your creativity. Enjoy the process of making a game. That has made such a huge difference with Adaptory. And that is everything I had to talk about. So there's time for Q&A, but I'd also love to ask the audience as well, has anyone here shipped a game with a weird engine? What were your experiences and learnings, and what traps am I about to fall into? Otherwise, I'm happy to share the slides if you get in contact with me by email. Adaptory is coming out at the end of the year into Steam Early Access, and you can wish this it today. Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
Great talk.
Thank you.
I'm so thrilled to see, because I think quite a few years ago now, to see a whole game emerge in that time.
Yes.
Really cool. Oh, thank you. Hi. I have shipped a title on a weird engine quite a few years ago, and I was nodding and screaming internally when you were talking about building on Mac, because mine was for iPads in particular. Don't do this. And it was a point-and-click adventure game made in RenPy, which was at the time very mature visual novel.
Yes.
So don't do that. But I'm so happy to hear that you're not targeting the App Store, because that's where all of the nightmares happen. 1,000 times more. I did have an actual question. What was it? Oh yeah. I mean, I wanted to ask, do you know if, and it's fine if the answer is I don't know because I didn't touch them enough, but do Unity and Unreal actually make any of that evil sort of certifications and having to register with the Apple Developer Program and stuff? Do they actually make any of that more streamlined, or is that something we just always have to deal with?
I suspect that having a Unity or Unreal game gives you a pathway. It's not that the Epic or Unity do the work for you, but they're like, oh, this is another Unity game to go through the process.
And I'm sure it's still very expensive, but it's probably a little bit less painful than we've had it.
Yes. The idea of taking a Java-based game to something like Xbox, I'm aware that Minecraft Java Edition is not on Xbox, and Xbox and Minecraft are owned by the same company.
Yes, which is really funny to think about.
Yeah.
I'll say I've done a game in OpenFL,
Yes.
which is a hex engine.
Yeah.
And I'll repeat what they said. Doing the Apple ecosystem was not worth it.
There's always a shell at Mac for a while.
The biggest problem I had with doing it was not shipping the game so much as what happened after the game was shipped, in that on the Android store, because they have their policies about using the latest APIs and all the rest.
Yeah.
When I received the update to say that I needed to compile for the latest APIs, then I had to go back to the thing, compile it. By that time, the engine had also been updated, and they'd made a decision in the engine design which pretty much ruled out one of the major pathways that I'd done in my design.
Yep.
And so by being forced to continually upgrade, I had to negotiate this real pain.
Yep. Yeah. It's a constant cycle of understanding what restrictions they're adding on to the different environments like sandboxing and being able to run executable code. And
That's really important. I forgot to mention the games that I did for iPad, they don't work anymore because for a time I was actually coming back to having re-upgrade everything every single year. And these weren't App Store games. These were locally on just a couple of iPads installed in a site. And it became too unprofitable to keep sending me out there to essentially just rebuild certificates.
Yep. Yeah, I have a few apps from my web dev days that are no longer working because they updated the API too many times.
I'll just add one thing there as well, is when you're talking about whether or not people are putting the money that you're paying for an engine into the engine development or
Yes.
into anything, the biggest measurement you can have on that is if the organisation doing the game development or the engine development has taken investor funding. Because if they've taken investor funding, you know that their priority is to paying back the investors.
Yes, that's very, very true. It's very, very true. Thank you. Around the back.
I'm curious to know what kind of testing you did, because yes, I think you're right that testing in Unreal and Unity is rare, and the frameworks, I think there is something there for Unreal. Yeah, but it's probably just one of those things in Unreal Classic. It's just not documented in any way, anywhere, and nobody knows about it. So yeah, I'm curious.
Oh, I'd love to talk about the different ways I've done testing for Adaptory. I would describe it as I've tried to do as little as possible to keep it stable, but also aware that a lot is not testable without investing a heck of a lot of money and time. So, for example, I have as many unit tests as I can. I have some integration tests. So with the simulations, I have different simulation suites that work in, like, what if you just do the liquid simulation? And then I have a different suite for what happens if you do everything, just to make sure everything works. I'm very comfortable with deleting tests that are fragile, and also I also try not to automate the process of anything that's a visual. So if I don't try and test that the game looks good, because my thinking is that it is very hard to write an automated test for visual tests, and it is easier to just get your players, get yourself in front of it, and you can see it much faster. It's a separate talk I really want to talk about.
Yeah, I was writing some tester in development for like a custom renderer, and one of the tests is like, is this triangle the right color? And I spent ages just trying to get the test to report correctly, because it was like one like byte off or something, you know, because the color rounds. So it was just incorrect, but I could see that it was correct, and I was like, why did I spend so many hours like I could just see that the triangle was rendered.
Yeah, I've seen if you try and go into testing UIs, like if you're trying to do a difference, this is from my web dev days. If you're trying to do a difference, text rendering is different between different platforms, and then the anti-aliasing is different on different platforms. And as far as I know, when I was in web dev, there was no good framework for testing visual changes. And so I try and minimize as many visual tests as possible and focus more on the systems and abstracting them into units that I can test cheaply and lightly and with automation. So I try very much to keep my entire test suite on my local machine down to under 3 minutes as much as possible, which is tricky. So again, then it goes into, you need to take out as much as you can and put into a separate library that you can test separately. Yeah, different talk.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for coming. Hope to see you around NZGDC. Have a great afternoon.